Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Essay, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He is a coach as well as a leadership trainer, no other than Mr. Ben Brearley.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. Appreciate the invite.
Yes, welcome to Abstract Essay, Mr. Ben. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Yeah. So, as you said, I'm a leadership coach and trainer. Before I started into the coaching industry, I was leading teams and projects in management roles for about 15 years, just over 15 years. Started off in the technology industry as a sort of quieter leader, and then I hit a lot of the challenges of introverted leaders where they feel pressure to be louder than the loudest person in the room, or to lead like a stereotypical leader where they have the most energy, they're the loudest, they speak the most. And so now I work with more quieter, reflective, thoughtful leaders to try to help them get into those senior leadership roles.
Well, Mr. Ben, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about leading with confidence, even if you're not the loudest person in the room. Interesting topic. How do you define confidence in leadership when it is not tied to volume or extroversion?
Yeah, it's interesting. So confidence in leadership for me is just feeling of being self-assured. So you know that you're capable of doing the work or leading the team or getting the result, and we experience less self-doubt and second guessing of your own actions. That's how I define confidence. And the interesting thing about confidence is it generally comes after you do stuff, not you don't need it to do things. It's obviously nice if you feel confident going into a situation, but sometimes you build confidence. Well, usually I find you build confidence after doing the hard thing and then looking back on it and realizing, hey, I did that before, I can do it again. And that's how you build confidence. So a lot of leaders, I feel that they feel like they need to be confident before they do the leadership role or take on the leadership challenge. But actually, confidence comes afterwards.
What are the most common misconceptions about what makes an effective leader?
That's a good question. I think that the main one is that they need to be directive and strong. I'll put strong in quotes, because that tells us that, or that makes people think, well, I have to be loud and direct and forceful, and I have to tell people what to do and order people around, or I have to know the most about the topic or the expertise in the workplace to actually lead effectively. But yeah, those are common misconceptions. So people feel like they have to have a strong presence and they have to be the one who's commanding the room and that sort of thing. And obviously, that is a big misconception because it points to the fact that only extroverts can be good leaders. But in real life, we know that introverts can be good leaders as well, and quieter people often have good qualities that suit leadership as well. And they're the sort of people I work with.
Very well said. Mr. Van, very well said. Can you share an example of a quiet leader who inspired you and what made them impactful?
Yeah, I can. I think one of the fairly recent examples was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. So her name was Jacinda Ardern, and she was she was quite empathetic and thoughtful about her leadership approach. And particularly in politics, we see a lot of bluster and, false promises and all these sorts of things. We see a lack of empathy often. And she really displayed a lot of empathy and she was Prime Minister of New Zealand when she was when they went through COVID as well. And her approach was quite thoughtful. She went out and about and she engaged with the community. And I found that her approach was strong but also empathetic. And I thought she was more of a thoughtful leader that I sort of resonated with, I think, as well.
Let's talk about the self perception and mindset. How can someone reframe the quiet nature as a leadership strength rather than a weakness?
Mm. So there's a couple of things that quieter people, or let's say introverted people, do effectively in leadership. One thing is they don't necessarily talk all the time, which means they're likely to be able to listen more effectively. So that's one thing that's quite good. They don't feel the need to speak all the time, and so they give other people room to contribute. And in today's leadership, especially in workplaces, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for opportunities to engage and contribute. And so that's one thing that thoughtful or quieter leaders are able to do quite effectively. And I think that giving the space is the big one, I think. And you're able to give people that room to participate. So I think that's one way of sort of reframing quiet leadership as well. You're quiet, giving people other opportunities to contribute. So you don't need to be the one speaking all the time or running the show all the time, because that's quite empowering for the people around you. It's also quite reflective. So what I notice with some leaders who are more extroverted, results driven, they're more direct and forceful, they don't take the time to reflect on what's been going on and improve. Whereas introverted leaders are often introspective. And so they think about, oh, how did that happen? What could I do better next time? And they think about how their leadership affects others. And that's more intentional. And usually I find that gets better results. And I think we need more of that in our workplaces, basically.
How do you handle situations where louder voices try to dominate the conversation, Mr. Ban?
Yeah, I think it's about practicing the skills of speaking up. I think that's a big part of it. So one of the things we can't do as introverts, and I'm an introvert myself, is just assume that the world is going to change for us. So the world is still quite extroverted, even though, roughly around 45, 50% of people are more on the introverted side of the scale. We can't assume that the world is going to change and it's going to let us speak. So we have to carve out those opportunities. So what I would say is we need to practice those skills. So for example, when I was younger, when I started my consulting career, because I was a consultant for about 5 or 6 years in some of the big consulting firms, and what I realized when I started that was I'm going to have to speak in public quite a lot more. I have to brief executive teams and all this sort of stuff. And so I actually went to Toastmasters public speaking group for 2 years to improve my public speaking, because I used to be really scared of it. And that was one of the best things I've ever done, because it meant that I could adapt my style. I could speak in public when I needed to. I could volunteer to run the meeting or to give a presentation, and I wasn't scared about it. And so we need to learn to adapt. So if people are interrupting you, for example, you need to learn the skills of getting your point across. You need to prepare for meetings so that you're ready to speak. Maybe you look at running meetings or facilitating meetings or presentations so that you can be the one who's commanding the room. But to do that, you have to build those extroverted skills. Sometimes we need to be extroverted, and we need to adapt our style. We can't just assume that everyone's going to let us speak, because sometimes that doesn't happen.
Let's talk about the practical strategies, Mr. Ben. What are the subtle but powerful ways to command respect in a room without raising your voice?
I think the one of the biggest ones is being credible. So you know your topic, you have the skills and qualifications, and you do a good job. I think that's the starting point for being able to command respect, is to be a credible person. And that comes from a few things. It means being qualified and skilled. It also means being reliable, doing the work you say you're going to do, showing up on time, being a steady influence as well. So being a relatively stable personality helps. And I think those are the things that they happen before the meeting, right? You build credibility before you're in that room, so you don't have to do it in that meeting. But I think what you can do is you can have a process for speaking. You can do the standard good meeting things, which is, okay, I have an agenda. And so you have someone that directs the flow of events, lets people speak, facilitates the conversation. And particularly, I think as a quieter leader, if you choose to run meetings or even learn to interject, you can control the flow of the conversation. So you don't have to be super loud. And sometimes it's about calling out the bad behavior that you're seeing. So if you're constantly being interrupted, you might call that out, or you might take it offline after the meeting and say, hey, take someone aside and let them know the impact that behavior is having and that you want to contribute more. Another thing you can do, I find that works well for me, is you don't have to do all your talking in big meetings. I actually engage way better one-on-one with people. So I did a lot of my networking and influencing at work in my management roles in the form of one-to-one meetings like lunch, coffee catch-ups, those sort of things, because that's where I did my best work. And so you can actually do a lot of pre-work, which builds you respect and credibility before you actually have to rely on shouting people down in a meeting. But it's also, one last thing is, it's also important to recognize that you can adapt your style. So just because you're a quiet leader doesn't mean that you can't be loud sometimes. So you might think of your own examples where, let's say, your child is sick and you're at the hospital and no one's helping you. You might become very loud and direct in those conditions, even if you are a quieter person. So we can always adapt our style. Doesn't mean we have to be always quiet all the time.
How can leaders use silence strategically in meetings or negotiations?
Using silence in meetings, I think often it's just asking questions. So one of the biggest things I do in coaching is give people silence in terms of time to think as well. And it's just about that pause. So there was an interesting book by Viktor Frankl, who's a psychiatrist in the Second World War. And you might have come across this book, Man's Search for Meaning, which has had a bit of a resurgence lately as well. And in the book, he talks about being able to choose our response. So the power of choosing a response, which means, okay, we have some event happen, then there's an emotion that happens, and then there's a pause, and then we respond afterwards. So basically, it means you can have that pause to choose your response. So I think silence is just taking a pause, asking an interesting question. So you might be prepared for the meeting, whatever it is. Be prepared, ask a good question, let the silence sit there for a while, let people think. And I think when someone asks you a question, pausing before you answer can be a good way to seem calm and composed as well.
Very well said. Mr. Ben, very well said. The silence is the key. What's your go-to tactic for ensuring your ideas are heard in group settings?
Well, like I said, it's about possibly controlling the flow of conversation, looking for your moment to interject. So either you have a good facilitator in the room or you can facilitate the conversation so that you can make sure people are heard. And you do this with different brainstorming techniques. For example, one of the common ones is that I see a lot is people still do brainstorming like everyone just shout out their ideas and someone writes them on a wall or something. But often the best way to do that sort of thing and idea generation, make sure your ideas are heard, is to let everyone reflect individually, write down their ideas, and then put them up somewhere, post-it notes or whatever it is. And then the ideas are discussed without having to shout them out, so people don't immediately judge them. They give people a time to contribute or even prepare before the meeting, then bring those ideas. So sometimes it's called silent brainstorming, where people write down their ideas Then we discuss them afterwards, rather than me having to shout my ideas at Daniel across the room. So that's one way. The other way is just to become better at raising your voice and being louder. So practicing being extroverted when you need to, but I think also being prepared and concise in your answers. So if you know you're going into a meeting where you have to raise a certain idea, then I would prepare for that. I would understand how I'm going to speak about it, what sort of argument I'm going to put forward, and make it concise. And then I would put that forward in the best way I can, which is in a concise way where you've thought it through. It's nice and short and to the point. And I think a lot of the work with this gets done before the meeting, though. I think we think about, okay, yeah, we need to learn strategies to interrupt people and that sort of stuff. We can do that, but if you build credibility and trust before all these meetings that we're talking about, then people will start to listen to you because they'll have that respect for you. So a lot of this groundwork happens way before the meetings and the presentations and all this sort of stuff.
Let's talk about the team dynamics. How do you foster an environment where introverted team members thrive?
So this is about a really psychological safety, which is a huge concept or a huge topic of discussion lately. Years ago, we talked about physical safety, people getting injured, those sort of things, and we still think about that, obviously. But now psychological safety is all about helping people feel safe psychologically at work, which means, okay, they can speak up without fear of getting in trouble. They can raise their ideas without being criticized, and they can engage, in the group without feeling threatened. So for introverts, for example, it's about changing the different forums there where they can contribute. So if all you have is big team meetings all the time where people have to shout out their ideas, or we go around the room and everyone talks in front of everyone, sometimes introverts aren't comfortable with that scenario. So they might shut down and the loudest people will get that forum. So as a leader in a team, what you've got to do is provide alternative ways to actually get people to input. And one way is to do frequent one-on-ones with people. Make sure you're giving them opportunities where it's a quieter, low-stress environment for them to give their ideas to you. So, one-to-one coffee catch-ups, those sort of things are things I used to do quite a lot in my leadership roles. Then it's about, if you are doing sort of team forums where people are contributing, you've got to notice, be observant of the body language in the room, who might not be saying anything, and you've got to facilitate them coming out and talking to you. So basically, okay, Daniel, I haven't heard from you yet. What do you reckon about this? Right? So you're calling on individuals to make sure they're contributing. And if they don't feel comfortable and you can notice that, then that's okay, because you can discuss it in a private setting later on. So there's a couple of different ways to do that, as I said. And another nice one is one of the more recent pieces of research done on team effectiveness and high performing teams is actually by McKinsey, the big consulting firm. And they found that the number one factor that influenced high performing teams was trust. And there's other factors as well, but trust was the biggest one. And basically, that means you're building connection within the team. So when team members trust each other, I feel, if I say an idea, I trust that Daniel won't hammer me or tell me that's a stupid idea or criticize me or laugh at me, because I trust him. We trust each other. So building connection within the team is really important, whether they're extroverts or introverts. And one simple way I like to do that, there's a nice little activity I use, which is super simple, but to build connection. And I use that when I'm coaching teams as well. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, okay, everyone to the next meeting, bring a personal item that is significant to you. And everyone brings an item like a key ring, or here's a poster, or here's a bookmark that I have, or whatever it is, right? And usually people bring weird and wonderful things, and they're not usually work related. And you just get that person to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes, a story about why that thing is significant to them. And as the leader, you go first, because that shows that you're willing to be a bit open and vulnerable. And I find that after you run those sort of things, people get a bit of a look into what makes the other person tick, and they end up building those little connections, which starts to build trust. And when you trust people and have connection, you're much less likely to criticize them or want them to come to any sort of harm, and that creates the conditions for this psychological safety. Now, obviously, that one little activity won't be all you need to do, but those sort of things over time, you want the team members understanding each other, getting to know each other, and once you do build that connection over time, that can build that trust.
Build the trust for sure. And Mr. Ben, as a coach and a leadership trainer, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
Short term is at the moment I'm working on a concept I call useful thinking. So you can probably see it on the screen there, the useful thinking journal. And what I like to do with this is a structured reflection process that I've developed to try to help people process events that have happened to them. So, things at work or home or whatever it might be, and then extract the insights out of them and move forward in a constructive way. So I'm a big fan of structured reflection. And that's one of the things I've created to try to help leaders, or don't have to be a leader to use it, to help people reflect in a structured way, because I think reflection is one of the best ways to gain awareness of yourself and then improve. In terms of long-term goals, I'm looking to engage more with my community, and basically not sure how to do this yet, and I'm still working on the strategies to do this, but what I want to do is have more influence over getting more thoughtful leaders into these senior leadership positions and into these senior roles, especially ones who feel like they don't feel like they're leadership material, for example, because they're not loud or extroverted. And so longer term, I'm just looking at increasing my impact over being able to bring more of those people into the spotlight and get them to take on those interesting and important leadership roles and make a real impact. Because what I think we're seeing at the moment is a lot of, let's say, popular leaders out there at the moment are quite extroverted and dominant, and I don't think we need more of that. I think we need more of the thoughtful, potentially quieter leaders in these leadership positions.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Ben, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be a coach as well as a leadership trainer?
Oh, if they want to be a leadership coach or trainer?
Yes.
I would say for me, it was working out my voice. So I did a lot of, I started my website in 2014, so about 11 years ago. Was writing about leadership, doing a lot of blogging. Then I started podcasting, and I basically making sure I practice writing and podcasting to get my point of view across and to develop my voice. That was pretty important. So having something to say, having an opinion, I think is really useful. And then I would say transition gradually. Get your coaching qualifications, whatever that looks like for you, and then look for ways to find coaching clients. There's lots of resources online to be able to do that, obviously, but also do it gradually rather than jumping out and saying, I'm just going to do coaching 100% of the time. What I did was I had half my time I spent doing a contract work, and then the other half time I spent building my business. And that's how I gradually transitioned out. So that's what I'd recommend, gradually making a gradual move rather than trying to take the risk of jumping out and doing it all yourself. And that worked for me. I found it a bit of a less stressful approach than doing a jump out into my own business straight away.
Thank you for that advice, Mr. Ben. And how can organization better identify and develop introverted leadership potential?
So it's interesting. I think it's about the first bit about is being aware of it. So as I said, latest research I've seen says that roughly 40 to 50% of people are more internationally are more on the introverted side of the scale. It's important to remember though that introversion lies on a basically like a standard deviation. So most of us are in the middle somewhere, which means we have a mix of introverted and extroverted tendencies. So to identify quieter leaders, a lot of organizations can do well to do the, things like psychometric tools, where you identify people's personality styles and those sorts of things. And there's a bunch of different ones around. But I think it's firstly about raising awareness within organizations that, hey, introverted people are not, it's not a problem, it's just a personality trait. And so raising awareness of ways to facilitate conversations, to identify quieter people in the team and looking at strategies to bring them out. I think it's about raising awareness, to be honest. And all these psychometric tools you can use are good, but they're not everything. So really it's about educating leaders to be able to look out for the quieter people in the team, know what to observe, and look at building tools or teaching them tools to actually engage their quieter team members as well. Because we're going to dispel this myth that leadership's only for the louder type people out there as well.
Mr. Ben, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in 5th season, abstract poetry in 2nd season, and my book 101 review in 5th season too. Comedy 101 in 2nd season, and my food 101 in 5th season as well. Geography 101 in 4th season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in its 3rd season, and Movie 101 Review, Music 101 in its 4th season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its 4th season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. So, Mr. Ben, what's one small step someone take today to lead more confidently without changing their personality?
One small step, I would say, understand what your personal values are. I'm a big advocate of that. So basically, you can look online. You can go to my website and find my Thoughtful Leader Survival Guide there, which you can download on my website as well. And basically, it's got an activity in there to understand what your core values are. I've also got a small online course for that as well. Now, understanding your personal values doesn't have to be an expensive activity, but it's really important, because once you understand your personal values, and which are basically just strong beliefs that you have, you're more likely to understand yourself. You're more likely to forgive yourself a little bit and basically find that self-acceptance, which means, hey, this is how I am. How can I get better from here? And values are also really important to be able to make decisions in how you lead. So if you know that certain values are important to you, they can help you decide when to speak up or take an action, and when you're happy to let things go. So when you have a better understanding of yourself, I think that's the key to leading others as well. So I'd recommend work on your personal values, understand what they are and what they mean to you, and then you can use those to lead more effectively. So that's my number one thing.
Well, Mr. Ben Brearley, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your coaching, your business, or whatever you projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, best thing to do, download the Thoughtful Leader Survival Guide. If you find yourself being one of these quieter leaders, it's on my website, thoughtfulleader.com. You can download it and you'll sign up to my newsletter as well. And that just gives you access to all the things that I publish, blogs, articles, podcasts, and other tools and resources that you might find useful as well.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ben Brearley, because if you support him, for sure, more and more and more empowering coaching to come. So, Mr. Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Daniel.
More time, people. See you soon.